Series for Making America 1789 to 1900. In the introductory session, we looked at some key terms and key groups of people and key ideas in terms of politics, economics, and social differences between the North and the South. Some of these will be explored today, so it might be useful to have those notes in front of you. But we're going to start with American expansion, 1789 to 1838. Firstly, we're going to have a look at how the USA expanded, or how it grew. When the USA gained their independence from the British in 1776, there were only 13 original states, and these were all on the east coast of America. Americans believed that they should have the right to expand west. Now, the main problem that comes with that is that we spoke about the fact that the rest of America is dominated by the indigenous people, or the natives. So in order for America to expand these original 13 states on the East Coast, they are going to need to encroach on native land. So we're going to come across a few problems that will appear as America starts to expand west. As I just spoke about, the Americans fought the British in the War of Independence. This was in 1776. And as a result of this, when America gained their independence, they gained 230 million acres of land. We've spoken about the fact that natives lived on this land, and therefore we are going to have conflict in order to see who secures this land. The land that they gained was known as the Northwest and Southwest Territory. Remember, we spoke in the introductory session about the fact that territories cannot yet become states because not enough people live there. So at the moment, it's the Northwest and Southwest Territory that has come under their control. In 1794, President George Washington, who, remember, was one of the original founding fathers who developed the Constitution, he decides that he's going to fight the natives for particular land in America. And this battle becomes known as the Battle of Fallen Timbers. The Americans win this battle, and as a result of that, we see something called the Treaty of Grenville, which is signed by the natives. What this allows is the US government to take control of the Northwest Territory that's been gained following the War of Independence. So straight away, 1794, not long after their independence, the white Americans have taken a significant chunk of land from the natives. Remember, this is again still a territory, not a state at the moment, because not enough white Americans have entered that place. We then have something called land speculators. Now, you'll see that there is another president on the slide, President Jefferson. You do not need to know the chronology of all of the presidents in America's history as we go through this course, but you do need to know specific presidents that were responsible for specific policies. And President Jefferson was in charge of giving chunks of land to people called land speculators. He sold these chunks of land in 640-acre chunks. Now, 640 acres is a hell of a lot of land, and it was also very expensive. So only the richest people in America could become land speculators. But they made a huge profit from this policy that Jefferson came up with. This is because they sold these 640-acre chunks on. So they broke them down into smaller sections. So, for example, they might sell somebody a 5-acre plot of land, but they sell this for a very high price. So it enables smaller yeoman farmers to buy land for the first time in small chunks, but they're actually making these land speculators a lot of money. I've got an example on the slide for you that in Wisconsin, 500,000 acres were bought by just 68 men. So those 68 men were extremely rich. They then sell on and break up the 640-acre chunks that they have, and they make a lot of money. So this allows the USA to expand because more farmers will be moving west to buy these chunks of land, and that, remember, is more likely to make a territory become a state. We then have something called the Louisiana Purchase, which is extremely significant as well. Again, we have President Jefferson, and he purchases a huge territory of Louisiana from the French in 1803 for $15 million. This added 530 million acres of land to the USA. So by purchasing this land from the French, he has enabled the USA to expand or to grow. Finally, we have explorers such as Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark are the names to know for the exam. And these explorers follow the Missouri River to find a route to the Pacific coast. Now, by looking for the Pacific coast, which is obviously on the far west of America, they are going to come across new areas, new territories, and they are going to feed this information back to the president. They also made lots of maps, which then allows more explorers to follow their routes. This inevitably is going to lead to more people moving to new places within America, and again is likely to make Americans claim certain territories, which then could potentially become states if enough white Americans move there. These were all reasons then that the USA expanded, and you will need to know these for the exam. You'll see as I've gone through that I've highlighted key parts in bold. It would be very useful for you to make sure that you can learn specifics like these to be achieving the higher grades such as 7, 8 and 9 on the exam. We then have the growth of slavery. It's inevitable that as the USA expanded and grew, slavery would expand and grow as well, and there are numerous reasons for that. The first one is a technological change, which came in the form of something called the cotton gin. This was a piece of technology. It was created by somebody called Eli Whitney in 1793. This helped to separate cotton fibres from the cotton seeds quickly, and it also sped up the cleaning of cotton by 50 times. So this basically allows the southern plantation owners to produce more cotton, and at a quicker rate. As plantations had more of this machinery, remember, that cleans the cotton, they needed more slaves to actually pick the cotton. So because it can be processed at a quicker rate, it made more money, they needed more slaves to do the initial picking of the cotton. So the cotton gin helped the growth of slavery because there was a demand now for more slaves. We then have the role of banks. The banks loan money to Southerners to buy and expand their plantations. So without this money, many Southerners wouldn't have been able to have their plantation in the first place. So the more money that is made available to Southerners to develop or buy new plantations, then there is more of a demand for slaves. So this leads to the growth of slavery. We then have something called the pushing system. This was very immoral, so very wrong, but it was a system which was created to force slaves to work at a quicker rate. So it increases the pace of picking cotton by putting the fastest picker at the front of the line. Every slave behind that picker has to keep up with the person in front of them. So the idea is that the slaves are regulating the pace of picking themselves, but by putting the fittest and the strongest picker at the front, it means that everybody else has to keep up. If they didn't, there would be punishments such as whipping. So everybody feels a need to keep up with that person in front of them. This will lead to more cotton being picked, and it will also lead to more money, and then again that leads potentially to the expansion of the plantation and for the desire for more slaves to become part of this system. We then have the Louisiana Purchase, which I mentioned on the previous slide. Again, just a reminder, purchased in 1803 for $15 million from the French. It added 530 million acres of land to the USA. And this was a southern area of America. So the territory that came as a part of the Louisiana Purchase quickly turns into southern states. These included Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. These were deep South states. They had plantations, they had slavery. And these new states joined with Georgia and North and South Carolina, and they became known as the Cotton Kingdom. So the Louisiana Purchase enabled America to have a lot more southern states. This again leads to more plantations and again a demand for more slaves. So again we see slavery grow. Finally, we have the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Now you can clearly see that this is very important. There's lots of bold bits within this statement, so please make a note of this. In 1820, this compromise allows slavery to grow because slavery is allowed in the new state of Missouri and any states beneath it. So there is almost a line drawn across America. States below this line are allowed slavery, states above it are not allowed slavery. So as much as it is helping limit the amount of expansion of slavery, any new states below Missouri can have slavery. So slavery will expand. And this is going to lead to more slaves and again the growth of slavery as a system. They do add Maine as a free state on the East Coast as well, which helps to bring balance to the amount of states that are slave and the amount that are free. But nonetheless, it does increase slavery. It does help slavery grow. It's worth noting here that some Northerners did benefit from slavery. So cotton helped many Northern businesses, and land speculators were often Northern, and they sold land to people in the South who wanted to develop plantations. So do not think that everybody in the North was completely against slavery. If there was an economic benefit that they could make from it, some people actually supported it. Finally, we have the idea of Indian removal. Now, we spoke about the fact that these 13 original states that were expanding would inevitably be encroaching on native land. The natives, or the indigenous people, had been there right from the start. They had always lived on that land, and the only way that America could expand was by almost conflict with these natives. So we're going to have a look at what happened for the natives to have to move. First of all, it's worth noting that there were some tribes who tried to assimilate. Assimilation would be a really good key term to use in the exam, hence it being in bold, and it just means fitting in. So some tribes tried to fit in with white American culture. They thought that if they tried to adapt, then they would be left alone. There are 5 tribes that became known as the civilized tribes. They were given this name by the white Americans because of the fact that they were trying to fit in, so they were now seen as civilized. And these were the Cherokee, the Creeks, the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, and the Seminoles. All of those names will seem quite odd to us, but you need to make sure that you could use them in the exam. And I've given you an example of the Cherokee, who tend to be the most common example that we see on exam papers, so you might just want to learn how they tried to assimilate or fit in. And I've given you an example of how they did this. So they modelled their economy and government on the USA's, and they had a capital called Okota, which was modelled on Washington. So they were trying their best to mirror what was happening in the white American states in the hope that they would be left alone. Unfortunately, in 1830, President Andrew Jackson does not agree with this policy of assimilation. He doesn't like the natives. He doesn't want to get on with them. He just simply wants white Americans to dominate any land that they have claimed or that they can claim. So part of the Indian Removal Act stated that tribes would be moved west of the Mississippi River. So any tribes that were east of the Mississippi River would simply be removed, would be pushed west. It was supposed to be voluntary, but it was clearly very forced. And there are 3 main reactions to this Indian Removal Act that you need to know for the exam. Firstly, we have the Seminole Wars. So we spoke about the Seminoles earlier being one of these 5 civilized tribes. They'd done their best to assimilate, but the US government go to war with them. The 3 wars that happen between the US government and the Seminoles cost the US government between $40 and $60 million. And the government ended up paying the remaining Seminoles to move. So it's not a complete disaster for the Seminoles because they do get some money, but nonetheless they have to give up their land that they have always lived on. So the Seminole Wars cost the government a lot of money. They are paid to move in the end. However, this proves to Andrew Jackson that he's not going to pay for tribes to move again. So it sets a precedent, it sets an example that he will perhaps have to be more forceful to move natives so that they will move west of the Mississippi River. And we have 2 more examples of this. We have a group called the Creeks. Again, one of the 5 civilized tribes had tried to assimilate. However, the Creeks signed a treaty which handed out a large amount of their land in Alabama to the US government. So they try to please the US government. In return, the Creeks were all offered a small amount of land in Creek territory. However, land speculators, remember these men that Jefferson started that had 640 acre chunks of land, they start to buy large areas of Creek land and they take the surrounding areas too. This is inevitably going to cause huge anger from the Creeks. They've signed this treaty. They didn't want to hand over the land in the first place, but they have. They've been told that they can hold on to some of their own territory, and then these land speculators start buying up these large areas. Americans were also squatting on Creek land as well, so basically the Creeks are not seeing any advantage of signing this treaty. So what they begin to do is they steal American livestock and crops, and they commit crimes such as arson and murder. So there is huge anger from the Creeks, and they begin to react quite violently. Alabama asked for the support of the US government, and they do help them. And as a result, by 1837, 15,000 Creeks had moved west. So because of the violence used against them, they end up moving west. So this is not another example of paying tribes to move. This is using violence to get them to move west. Finally, we have something called the Cherokee Trail of Tears. So again, a treaty is signed. A small number of Cherokee had signed a treaty to hand over their land. However, many of the tribe understandably disagree and reject this treaty, so they think that they should be able to hold on to the land that they've always occupied. As a result of some of the tribe members rejecting the treaty and refusing to move west, in 1838 the US government sent 7,000 troops to remove the tribe, to push them west of the Mississippi River as the Indian Removal Act of 1830 states. 18,000 Cherokee were forced into concentration camps. And over the winter, the Cherokee began a 3-month forced march, that should be west, and 5,000 troops died. So we see the fact that the Cherokee have been moved. There is a very violent reaction to them. And we can clearly see here that the tribes are being treated very, very badly. And the government, as a result of the Indian Removal Act, are going to take native land by whatever means they can. Key statistic here, hence the fact you've been in red, by 1838 over 46,000 Indians had been removed from their land, leaving 25 million acres of land available for white settlement and for slavery. So 46,000 Indians had been removed, and this was predominantly a result of the Indian Removal Act by Jackson. So however much the tribes had tried to assimilate, this was not going to be a policy for them. They were simply moved. Okay, so that is basically an overview of how America expanded between 1789 and 1838. It would now be worth you testing yourself. So I'd like you to pause the video now, make a note of the answers as the questions as we go through, and you can then fill in the answers. So pause the video now, and then I will reveal the answers to you. Okay, so question 1, which battle and treaty saw George Washington defeat the natives and take the Northwest Territory under his control? The answer for that is the Battle of Fallen Timbers and the Treaty of Granville. So remember, this was the first battle that we see between white Americans and the natives to gain more land. What was a land speculator? We've spoken about them a lot during this first session. This was a person who bought chunks of land at 640 acres at a time. Remember, it was under Jefferson's presidency, and these men then sold their 640 acres into smaller chunks for higher prices to make a profit. Number 3, what was the Louisiana Purchase? This was in 1803, and it was where America purchased 530 million acres of land for the French for $15 million. Remember, this was under Jefferson's presidency again, and remember, it led to those deep South states that became part of the Cotton Kingdom, so slavery was very much a part of the land that was purchased from the French. Name the piece of technology which allowed the production of cotton to increase by 50 times. Number 4, this was the cotton gin, and it was produced in 1793 by Eli Whitney. Number 5, what was the Missouri Compromise of 1820? Very important. This was where slavery was to be allowed in Missouri and any new states beneath it, but it was to be banned in any states above Missouri's border. And remember that Maine was added as a free state to balance Missouri being added as a slave state. So they did try and balance, but this was going to allow slavery to expand. But it was, as the name suggests, a compromise. Okay, so what was the Indian Removal Act and which main tribes suffered as a result? So we have President Jackson stated in 1830, remember, as part of the Indian Removal Act, that tribes would be moved, that should be west, of the Mississippi River. The Seminoles, the Creeks, and the Cherokee are the 3 main tribes who suffered as a result of this. And remember, we have the Seminole Wars, the Creek Revenge, and the Cherokee Trail of Tears. Okay, so hopefully that has helped you with American expansion. I apologise about the fact that it should be west of the Mississippi River. I will change that on the presentation now, so please make sure your notes say, remember, the natives were pushed west rather than east. Okay, the next session that we will do will be looking at the West, 1839 to 1860.